It doesn't matter what sort of relationship you're in or which stage in the relationship you're in. You have to know that things change. They always do. Things change because life changes. And when life changes, situations change. And when situations change, people change. So what used to be a strength in the relationship can become a liability. And the frustrating part is, you don't even see the shift happen until one day you find yourself wondering, how did we get here? Yes, this speech is about marriage, but it's really for anyone who is in a long-term relationship or who plans on being in one. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. I hope you come away with something that is not just helpful but useful. I'm going to tell you a story about a guy called James. He grew up in Dorchester, right outside of Boston. His parents were immigrants. They fled what used to be part of the former Soviet Union in the late 70s. And about 3 months after arriving in New York, James was born. It was a fresh start for his parents, and they were excited for the opportunity to build again, to start a new life with better prospects. But somewhere along the way, what they celebrated as a fresh start and a lucky opportunity turned into a nightmare. I suppose the pressure got to James's father. In Belarus, he didn't have much, but he was home. He knew the system. He was part of a community. And there was family. In New York, things were different. He had a new baby at home and work was hard to come by. The language barrier made fitting in hard. English was a foreign language for him. And to further complicate things, his wife, who had always been his chief supporter and confidant, who had always been a source of energy and joy, was suffering from postpartum depression. She was never really able to overcome it, and eventually it became a permanent depressive disorder. So even when James's father was able to find stable work, his ability to remain employed was typically compromised by his wife's inability to take care of their son. It was a far cry from the life they expected to build. And just before James's 6th birthday, his mother killed herself. It was graphic. James found her and was with her for over an hour until his father got back from work. It was worse than a nightmare. Nightmares you eventually wake up from. This you relive over and over again. With his wife gone, and fearing that his son was broken beyond repair by what he'd experienced, the man utterly gave up on life. It was as if with each day that passed, a bit of him disappeared. It wasn't that life was tearing him apart. It was more as if he was making a deliberate effort to turn in the little that was left of his once joyful life. James had always been strong. He'd always been practical, and he had a gift of being able to accept what there was and make a life for himself regardless. Even as a young child, he had already accepted that he would be the one to take care of his mother. And he did exactly that until her death. He saw himself as her caretaker, not as her son. So when she died, he wasn't necessarily devastated. And he certainly wasn't broken, but he felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. He wanted to save her because he knew that saving her would somehow rescue his father. But instead, he helped bury his mother and watched his father slowly disappear into nothing. James and his father moved to Dorchester a year after his mother's death. And 4 months before his 18th birthday, James's father died. A heart attack. Maybe it was the drinking he'd become so fond of. Or perhaps it was a broken heart, one soaked in perpetual disappointment and shriveled by unbearable pain. And now, James was alone. Both parents gone. But while he felt a unique sadness, characterized by a longing for what could have been, he also felt free. Free from the responsibility of the caregiver. Free from being the subject of his father's silent apologies. And free to begin a life he knew his parents wanted for him. He was free. In the years that followed, he graduated from Stanford, blossomed at a banking career, and one afternoon, at a cafe in Cambridge, the woman that would change his life forever was ordering coffee. James walked in and got in line behind her. After the woman got her coffee, she turned around and ran right into James. The situation was bad, coffee everywhere, and James got burned. As it would turn out, the woman was a doctor. And of course, feeling just awful about the whole thing, sprang into action and took charge of his well-being. She insisted on helping him clean things up, gently applying burn cream to his wounds. She even insisted on getting his address. She was determined to replace his stained shirt. Here's the interesting part. After the immediate shock of being scolded by the hot coffee, and after he had composed himself, James found himself watching this frantic woman making a big fuss over him. She was beautiful, and not just beautiful, but desperately so. He saw her. There are people who look at you, and there are people who see you. He saw her, the mystery in her mistake, the effortless grace in her panic, the composure in her embarrassment, the compassion in her insistence, and the utterly devastating beauty of her deep brown eyes. He saw her, and in that vision, he finally saw himself. And just as quickly as the accident happened, the moment was over. Before he knew it, they were saying goodbye, and she was still apologizing as she tugged his address into her handbag. 3 days later, James was back in the office, and there was a package on his desk. It's bizarre how the mind and emotions work, because a moment as intense as what happened at the cafe just a few days earlier had disappeared from James's mind. So much so that he really, truly had no idea what could be in the package. But he opened it, and when he did, he saw a shirt. He remembered. He could see her again. He could feel again that hesitating joy he had not yet learned to trust, and the growing wonder he had not succeeded in quieting. The shirt came with a note. "James, I'm sorry. I can't say it enough. I'm sorry. Here's a replacement for the shirt I ruined. I hope it fits. You should come by my practice sometime. I just want to make sure the burns are healing well." It was signed Anne. She left a number. You see, sometimes you know exactly how things are going to go. You don't know how you know, you just know that you know. All you have to do is make the decision, and the story unfolds exactly in the manner you imagined it would. This was one of those times for James. He was staring at the number. He knew if he called her, everything about the rest of his life would change. It was a strange feeling. It was exciting. It was terrifying, and it was, in a way, idiotic. What exactly was supposed to happen? James really had no agenda, just curiosity. He had a curiosity he couldn't shake, and after a few minutes of just staring at the number, he called her. The phone rang, and just before he hung up, there was a voice he realized he'd been waiting to hear. "Hi, it's Anne. Hello. Anyone there? Anyone there?" It always takes a second to catch your breath when amazing starts to happen. So it took James a few seconds to respond. "Yeah, hey, it's James, hot coffee, 3rd-degree burns, ruined shirt, James." Anne laughed and she said, "Ah, yes, that James." They hit it off, and it was as if they'd known each other for years. They'd practically spent 20 minutes on the phone, laughing, and finally they agreed to meet. Some people can tell you the exact moment they fell in love. They can describe for you precisely what was happening and what they were feeling. And if you asked James about Anne, he would tell you that he'd spent every moment between his first memory and the day he met her in that cafe falling in love with her. It sounds absurd, but the feeling was real. It was the way he felt as they were holding hands walking through the Boston Commons that evening after their first date. I'm not sure Anne would have said the same thing about James, but she couldn't deny that the feeling was unique. It was different. Something special was happening. Maybe that moment came for her a few weeks later. They had just had sex for the first time and were laying in bed. Anne looked over and noticed James deep in thought. So she asked, "Why so serious? You look like you're trying to solve algebra over there." He smiled, but there was some hesitation there, and she saw that. She picked up on it. She sat up and slightly more determined asked, "Seriously, what's going on?" James turned, he looked at her and said, "It was my first time." Anne looked confused, but had a big smile on her face. "Come on, you're joking. Your first time?" But before she could finish speaking, James suddenly realized what she was getting at and said, No, I don't mean that. I've done that many times." "Oh, really?" Anne jumped in. "You know what I mean. I've had sex before, but this was my first time making love." "Oh." Then silence. Then she kissed him and excused herself. James laid back down, but after about 10 minutes, and Anne hadn't come back to bed, he knocked on the bathroom door. He could hear her crying. He opened the door and found her sobbing. He was alarmed, concerned, confused, afraid, all at the same time. "What's wrong? What happened?" With tears in her eyes, she wrapped her arms around him and said, "Thank you. Thank you." James was still trying to figure out what happened, and he was still trying to ask what was wrong, but all she said was, "Shh, be quiet." Still crying, she kissed him again and again and again and said, "Thank you." They went back to bed, and without saying another word, they fell asleep, holding each other. 3 weeks later, they were engaged. 7 months after, they were married. They say that when you know, and these two knew. They really were a fantastic match. Like pieces of a puzzle, they just fit. That's what it feels like when you fit. There's no doubt, there's no resistance, you just fit. It doesn't matter if anybody else can see it. It doesn't matter who understands it or if they agree with it or support it. You feel it, and that's all that matters. It's all you care about. You're in love. You see, some of you know what that feels like. You know what it feels like to be wanted, but you don't know what it feels like to be needed. Some of you know what it feels like to be kissed, and in that kiss feel a moment of connection. But you don't know what it feels like to be held, and in that embrace feel a lifetime of love. I know many men who've been made to feel strong, but have never felt what it's like to feel gorgeous. I don't mean handsome, I mean gorgeous. Gorgeous is how you feel when love proves to you that your weaknesses don't make you less. That there's more to your strength than your power, that there's more to your value than your ambition, and that where you came from and what happened to you is not your whole story. I know women who know what it is to be beautiful. They know what it is to be wanted, but have never felt what it is to be needed. It's only in their dreams that they ever get close enough to that feeling, but eventually they wake up desperately trying to hold on to a memory of a voice that was gently whispering in a dream.
For more GoodTalk transformational albums like this, download the GoodTalk app to start your transformation today. Link in the description.
Words are simple things that masquerade what your smile means to me. After all, how precisely can I describe what air means to fire or what forever means to love? They've never known what that feels like. To be needed is to truly matter. To truly matter is to be validated. When you were in love, and the idea of spending the rest of your life with another human being is real for you, you feel good. Literally, you're on a real high, and I'm going to tell you why. Yes, I know there are a bunch of chemicals flooding your brain and sustaining your high, but let's keep it simple. You feel good because when you are in love, you are at your best self. That doesn't have anything to do with being perfect, because let's face it, you can be falling in love and your credit can still be a mess. Your quirks and habits can still be annoying. Your neuroses and anxiety can still be issues, but that's the point about best selves. You can have all that going on, and somebody out there can overlook it all and ask, "Will you marry me?" Best selves means that somebody out there can put all that aside, all your insecurities, your flaws, stare into your eyes and answer, "Yes, I'll marry you." And that's how many marriages begin, with best selves. Even with all this drama I have going on, he still wants to marry me. I have some issues that I'm dealing with, and she still said yes. She still wants to marry me. It's hard not to feel special. It's hard not to feel like your best self. But is that what marriage is? Yes, I just explained that when you're falling in love, it feels like a union of best selves. But is that marriage? Is that really what's happening when rings are being exchanged, when I do's are being said, when families are joining and forever is being planned? It feels like it, but that's not marriage. If you want to understand marriage, then you need to understand nuance. That means that you need to be specific and clear about what's happening. What exactly do you mean when you say union? Do you mean union or do you mean partnership? When you say promise, do you mean promise or do you mean agreement? When you have assumptions, are your assumptions based on your expectations or are they based on reality? I'm trying to get you to see that just because you're on the same page doesn't mean you're reading from the same book. Just because you share the same map does not mean that you're exploring the same territory. Marriage is about nuance, and if you're unwilling to recognize that because you're operating from best self's perspective, the stumbling blocks you'll come across will show up fast. Nuance. Unions and partnerships are not the same things because of what they imply. Unions imply one, an intertwined coexistence, melding as one, moving, acting, and unthinking as one. Unions imply that you can read her mind. They imply that you can feel his fears. Unions are about assumptions, and assumptions don't always reflect reality. Partnerships are about multiples. Let's call it two. There's you and there's me, and we came here to share an experience together. An experience, not all experiences, an experience. So already the implication of a partnership suggests that we're together, but there's some space. Some people can't handle that space. They ruin their marriages trying to close the space because they're trying to kill a partnership to preserve a union that never existed. Marriage is not a union. Promises and agreements. There's a nuance there too. You promise to share an experience, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. You promised. But that was before you knew how dark the night could get. That was before you knew where your breaking point was. You made that promise before you knew the bitterness of betrayal and the savagery of loneliness. And the promise is still there because you think marriage is about best selves. The reality can change, but the promise remains. Promises don't respect reality. Agreements are different things. You agree to share an experience, but when reality changes, expectations change too, and you can go back and amend the agreement. Something changed, and now the risk is that you won't make it. And if you don't make it, then I don't make it. Now we better amend this agreement or we won't make it. You may have come into this marriage feeling like your best self, but now you know just how rough these waters can be. Now you understand just how little pressure it actually takes to break your resolve and to damage your faith. Now you realize how quickly enthusiasm can dry up. Because reality changed, the agreement must change. Marriage is not a promise. I'm using nuance to show you that marriage may not be what you think it is. I'm using it to try to get you closer to reality because if you can't see what you're walking into, you'll stumble all the way through. So if marriage is more of a partnership than it is a union, and more of an agreement than it is a promise, then what are we talking about? If you say, I'm married, what is that? That's just a state of being. It's a stagnant position. It's not developing, it's not growing, it's not moving, and if it's not moving, it begins to fester. It becomes a breeding ground for parasites. I'm talking about some of your marriages. What sort of parasites have become attracted to your stagnant marriage? What sort of unwanted elements are being introduced to your marriage because it's not moving? Marriage is not a state of being, it's a state of doing. Saying I'm married means you're doing something. It means that your activity and your attention is focused on something. And that something is what marriage is. There is a show on television called Naked and Afraid. They take two strangers, a man and a woman, and dump them off in some wilderness, in the jungle in the Amazon or a desert in Madagascar. And their challenge is to survive for 21 days with a machete and a fire starter or with some other essential. And they had to do so completely naked the entire time they were out there. You talk about awkward. They were exposed not only to the elements, the heat, the rain, the cold, but also to the stranger beside them. These people came in with their own ideas of how they were going to survive the challenge. They had cultivated certain skill sets they thought were going to give them an edge. They sort of had it figured out in their minds. The whole thing was done. It was one. They were going to work with their partner, leveraging each other's skill sets, and they'd make it for 21 days. Challenging, but doable. That's the general mindset these people start with. So the show starts. The couple meet each other, and for the first time, it's a bit awkward of an exchange. The hellos are awkward. Somebody cracks a corny joke about their lack of clothing. It's still awkward, but then they get started. And they have to build a shelter and find water before it gets dark. And in the effort to secure shelter and water, you begin to see differences in personalities come out. And they begin to realize that the challenge is going to be more difficult than they thought. And after the first sleepless night, Non-stop mosquitoes biting, the strange blood-curdling sounds that fill the pitch-black night. They know that this is going to be hard. Over the course of the next few days, thirst is the problem. They can't find clean water. And it's starting to impact their bodies and their attitudes. 5 days in and they're struggling to find food. They're practically starving. And then it begins. Exhausted bodies and exhausted emotions lead to conflict and hopelessness. This is the point in the show when they realize this is not what I thought it would be. I thought I would come into these woods and make the best of my skills and work with a cooperative partner. I thought that by now we'd be bonding over regular meals over an open fire. But this is something else. It's too wet out here to start a fire with these sticks. My partner is bossy, he's a know-it-all, she has no respect for my opinion, and I'm so hungry. This is something else. The tears start showing up around this time because they knew it would be tough. They knew it was going to be tough, but they never imagined it would be this tough. They knew it could get cold, but they never believed they could shiver this much. They were certain they would miss a few meals, but even in their nightmares, they never felt hunger pains like this before. People want to quit here. They get lonely here, they start missing their families here, and some go home here. But the ones who stay, the ones who get past this point have one thing in common. They realize that they are naked and afraid in the wilderness they haven't mastered. You see, that's what marriage is. Marriage is to be naked and afraid, trying to survive in a wilderness you haven't mastered. When you strip it all down, when you get rid of the diamond rings, when you put aside the darling this and the honey that, when you stop staring at the perfect house, the little picket fence with the adorable kids, when you strip it all down, you're not left with best selves. You're left naked and afraid, trying to figure out how you're going to survive without tapping out. This is what happened to James and Anne. What they discovered was real. And the way it unfolded was ideal, magical almost. But when the second child came, things changed. The love was still there, but the magic was hard to find. They had pictures of their past everywhere, but the memories were starting to fade. Both of them would quietly stare at each other, secretly craving the past, secretly wondering, what are we doing? Because memories fade and magic can turn into misery. This may not be for you because I'm talking to grown people now. People with some experience, people who've been there, people who are married and are lonely together. People whose magic has turned into the misery they can't talk about. People who are going to bed wondering, are we going to make it? Marriage is about survival. It's also about growth, but the real question is, can we survive together? And if all you're going to offer, if all you can offer is an imaginary idea of your best self, then you're not going to make it. Listen, some marriages are just bad. They're abusive and degrading, and they need to end, period. I'm not talking about those ones. I'm talking about yours. I love you and you love me, but this isn't working. And if something doesn't change soon, we're not going to make it. This is day 6 in the wilderness. You're cold, you're tired, you're hungry, and you finally realize that you're naked and afraid, and all you want to do is survive. Now we're talking about marriage. The strongest marriages begin here. Baby, it's not just you. I'm naked too. I'm also afraid too. I thought I had it, but I started to shake when I saw just how cold these nights could get. I thought I could feed us by myself, but I can't get this fire to start. You didn't think it would be this bad. I didn't either, but we have got to survive. You see, that's what the truth sounds like. So the problem with your marriage is not the sex, it's not the fights, it's not the money, it's not even the loneliness. The problem is that you don't know how to survive naked and afraid together. You can't survive naked and afraid by yourself. And if you don't have a partner who can see you, who can see that you're cold and shivering, you won't make it. That's what loneliness in marriage is, to be naked and afraid and to be unable to find your partner. But when you can see each other, when you understand that it's about survival and growth, then you understand that marriage is not about the glory of matrimony. Then you'll understand that marriage is about the wisdom of the trenches. I keep talking about survival. Can we survive together? Survive what? Survive growing together. Survive becoming our best together. You thought that marriage was about being your best self. No. It's about becoming your best self in a partnership with another person. That's hard. You see, you can lie to yourself, but you can't escape the audit of a loving partnership. The pressure of transparency can be destructive if you're not ready for it. Because all of a sudden, you have to deal with where you came from and what happened to you. You have to explain your anger and define your frustrations. You have to unmask your anxiety and reveal your depression. You don't go into marriage necessarily hiding parts of yourself. What happens is that life shows up. And when life shows up, see, I'm talking about the unexpected events, the stuff you didn't see coming, the disagreements that are not being reconciled, the insecurities that aren't being talked about, the injuries that are not being forgiven, the disappointments that aren't going away. When this stuff starts showing up, where you came from and what happened to you starts showing up too. You don't know how to be vulnerable because of how you were treated when you were 18. Your walls went up. And yes, you fell in love, you got married, but marriage is beating on your walls. Your self-esteem got damaged somewhere along the way, but you patched it up. You got married, but the demands of marriage are asking you to heal. Your band-aids aren't working anymore. The trenches are where you realize that you've committed to surviving in a place you've never seen before, in a place you've never been before, a functional household, an emotionally healthy environment, a place where you can be open and vulnerable. Whatever it is, the trenches are where you get stuck. They represent a stalemate. This is where many marriages exist, and it is where many marriages die, in the trenches. Never being able to overcome the gunfire of marital battles and the slings and arrows of disappointment and disillusion. They fall apart because they're trying to survive trench warfare alone. And it's impossible. You need a partner, you need a confidant, you need somebody you can be open and honest with, someone whose touch makes you feel strong, someone whose stare makes you feel loved, someone whose tears make you feel needed. I'm telling you that if you spend as much time really looking at who's in the trench with you as you do planning on how you're going to survive by yourself, you'll find that person. They may be afraid or ashamed, but you'll find them in the trench with you. This is the ugly part of marriage nobody wants to talk about. Stuck together in a trench and trying to survive apart. Fighting each other in a trench while bullets are being shot at us. But what if beneath the fights and mistrust, beneath the loneliness and tears, what if you're all I have? What if you're all I have? What if my hurtful words are just a front I put on? And my dismissive attitude is just a mask I wear because I'm really afraid? What if I still need you? When couples start asking these questions, the trenches are no longer the graveyard of marriages. The trenches become the birthplace of wisdom and beauty, and a place where the lingering fragments of passion and the remaining embers of love go to rekindle themselves. Heartbreak in marriage is a unique sort of agony. It's a different sort of torture. If we were still dating, it would be one thing. But I thought marriage would be different because you ought to know me by now. That's why this hurts so much. You see, what I'm trying to get you to understand is that marriage is a wilderness filled with surprises. And if you or your partner are willing to survive naked and afraid, I'm saying to you that you can re-empower your imagination, elevate your creativity, and not just survive, but thrive in the wilderness of marriage. I said that the trenches can be where your marriage rediscovers itself. So then, thriving can be a result of the trenches. I'll show you why. To be in a trench is to be pinned down and to be stuck in danger. Danger everywhere, and escape isn't obvious. But survival is the mission. Escape isn't obvious, but survival is the mission. When you're stuck like that and survival is the mission, you develop a different sort of thinking. You get more creative. You stretch and push yourself. You're willing and able to accept a new normal. You're able to put your ego into context. The bigger picture becomes your gospel. I wonder what would happen if you brought that into your marriage today. I wonder what your relationship with your partner and with yourself would look like in 6 months if you develop that sort of thinking. Maybe you don't want to change the way you're thinking. Maybe the only reason you're listening to this is because you're hoping you'll hear something that validates your opinion. So you can say to your partner, I told you so. It's your fault. Maybe you don't care about survival anymore. Maybe for you it's all about revenge now. I understand. There may be wrong actions, but there never ever wrong feelings. So if revenge, hurt, and bitterness is where you are, and all that's left in your marriage, then I get it, I really do. But if survival is left in there, if there's a pebble of hope, if there's a modicum of courage and just a bit of enthusiasm still left in your marriage, then you can make it. I'm saying to you that you can make it. And you're asking how? I love that question in marriage because now you're asking about a vision. Whether it's by hope or by faith, you're not focused on if you're going to make it. You're focused on how you're going to make it. That's what step one looks like when you begin to change your mindset to survive the trench you're stuck in. That's what James and Anne had to do. They'd had a good run and they thought they knew themselves. They thought they were unbreakable, but that was before the events that could break them showed up. Anne got sick and for 2 years they both battled. Her to stay alive and him to keep their young family together. They survived it, but it took a toll and something changed. They came out different people. Anne wasn't used to being looked after. She was usually the one looking after other people. It was a big part of her decision to become a doctor in the first place.
For more Good Talk transformational albums like this, download the Good Talk app to start your transformation today. Link in the description.
What got to James wasn't the fact that he had to take care of his family. It was the emotional fatigue of having to deal with the past he'd been ignoring. You see, Anne's sickness threw him back into his early childhood with his sick mother. The trauma of her death and the guilt over his inability to save her began to tear away at him. He hadn't had to deal with that in the past. He was distracted by survival and achievement. But one Thursday evening, after putting his son to bed, he went in to check on Anne, who was bedridden. She was asleep, and he was just about to walk out of the room when he noticed the blue and burgundy socks she was wearing. And just like that, he broke into tears. He quickly ran out of the room for fear that she was going to see him sobbing. You see, James's mother's favorite colors were burgundy and blue. And all of a sudden, he had to deal with that. Where he came from and what happened to him became an emergency that he could no longer ignore. James didn't know how to tell Anne about the shame he felt about doubting whether or not he could save his own family this time. And Anne didn't know how to tell him about the guilt she was suffering over burdening her family with her illness. See, that's what it means to be naked and afraid, married and trying to survive alone. Whether it's sickness or infidelity, emotional insecurities or chronic disappointment, life has caused you to be quiet about something you can't be honest about. James and Anne were emotionally exhausted, so even after Anne got better, they were making decisions based on exhausted emotions. You can't trust the way you feel when your emotions are exhausted. Shortcuts become convenient and bad ideas seem effective. They almost broke up, but when they realized just how far off their path they were, they knew they were stuck. When you're stuck, you can't get from point A to point B. I mean, it sounds a lot like a trench, right? When you're stuck in A and can't get to B, you're in the trench. And if you and your partner are going to survive, you're going to need a vision, someplace else other than point A. Someplace else other than the painful lows of suspicion and infidelity. Somewhere else other than the suffocating reality of disappointment or the agonizing condition of loneliness. If you're going to survive, you need to get to point B, and that requires a vision of someplace else. You've been unhappy for a while, but is your unhappiness destroying your ability to imagine what happiness in your marriage looks like? You've been disappointed time and time again, but is your disappointment sabotaging your ability to imagine what satisfaction in your marriage would look like? You're scared, but is your fear robbing you of your ability to imagine what security and support in your marriage would look like? You'd be surprised how many marriages are dying to survive, but they have nowhere to go. Survival is about vision. So if you make it out of the trench where you're stuck, where are you gonna go? If you don't have a vision, you'll escape your old trench only to fall into a new one. And as is often the case, people don't make it out all the way. Not because they don't have the endurance to do so, but because they trip and fall on the first step. The first step of creating a vision with your partner is to know what a real vision is. I know that your marriage is starting to tear at the seams. I know there is a lot of anger and frustration there, but where would you like your marriage to be instead? Right here is where most people get it wrong. Because 9 out of 10 times, the answers that come back are, I want us to be at a place where we're not arguing all the time. I want to get back to trusting each other again. I want us to get back to how we used to be. She needs to respect me. He needs to listen to me. We just have to get to financial security. People will describe for you all the actions and activity that point B, that other place, that somewhere else, all the actions and activity of that other place, because that's their vision of what survival looks like. But do you realize that none of that stuff matters? None of that stuff matters unless you know what survival feels like for you. You've told me what it looks like, but do you know what it feels like? If you don't know what it feels like, then how will you know when you get there? Because you can't trust your eyes alone. He may actually be listening to you now, but you're not satisfied. She actually may have developed some respect for you, but you're not satisfied. Because you're judging an inner quality by an outer presentation. The real vision is about how you want to feel. So let's run it again. I know your marriage is starting to tear at the seams. I know there's a lot of anger and frustration there, but where would you like your marriage to be instead? Now what's your answer? I want my marriage to be at a place where I feel safe and committed. I want my marriage to be at a place where I feel loved and connected, supported and needed. I want my marriage to be at a place where I feel enthusiastic and hopeful about the future. I want my marriage to feel like I'm being heard, seen, and understood. I want my marriage to feel like I'm being respected. I want my marriage to be at a place where I feel deserving. You see, there's a difference. What does it look like and what does it feel like? You can't ignore how you want to feel. If you do, you'll get to a place in your marriage that looks ideal, but is unsatisfying. So, step 1, vision. A vision of where you want your marriage to be that focuses heavily on how you want to feel when you get there. And you have to realize that you can't do it by yourself. You can't do it alone. You can't fix a marriage by yourself. Your partner has to be there too. So when I say you, I mean both of you. When I say vision, I mean 2 visions. Just because you want to feel safe and he wants to feel strong doesn't mean that you're not talking about the same place. This isn't about visions that compete with each other. It's about visions that complement each other. You can't do it alone. You have to collaborate. And that's step 2, collaboration. It's amazing how many couples decide that they need to survive. They want their marriages to be somewhere else. So they create a vision. They get step 1 down and then they blow it on step 2 because someone put themselves in charge of reaching the vision. I said to you that you can't do it alone. Neither of you is in charge. It's not your job to take her to a place she doesn't trust. It's not your job to drag him to a place he's not interested in. It's a collaboration, and that means that you're working together as partners being led by a common vision with individual parts. The vision is common, but the parts are individual, and that's what trips up most couples. Same destination, different ways of getting there. You see, James's vision was the feeling of closure and comfort. Anne's vision was about feeling secure in her vulnerability. But those individual parts came together to create a common vision for their marriage. And that's why it's important to respect the individual parts. Because if you don't realize that you may be getting there in separate vehicles, you'll allow your frustration at the lack of progress to derail you. He's getting there by car, you're taking a plane. Who do you think will get close to the vision first? So you get frustrated and put yourself in charge. It won't work. It's okay if he needs to go by car to get there. It just means that you may have to wait for him. She may need to take a bicycle to get there. It's okay. It just means that you may have to wait for her. You see, waiting shows up in step 3. I'll get to that later. But first, let's really understand what collaboration looks like. Collaboration in marriage includes a few things, I'm sure. But if listening and curiosity aren't part of it, then you're doing it wrong. Listening. When marriages get in trouble, listening is something that happens with the mouth. I heard what you said, but this is what I feel about the situation. You're not reliable. You're too impatient. You're selfish. You're too impractical. You're just a dreamer. Argument and criticism based on what you think she said. Anger and resentment based on what you thought he said. Are you listening? I know she said she doesn't want to hang out with you and with your friends anymore. But if you were listening, you would have heard her say that she's lonely. You heard him say he can handle it, but if you were listening, you would have heard him say that he's afraid. Listening isn't just something you do with your ears. Listening is an attitude. It's a quality of commitment. It's a behavior that indicates that you are there. It's about noticing a rhythm and being able to contextualize actions. The moment I get home from work may not be the best time to have a serious conversation with me. I may need a minute. And if you're not noticing that as part of my rhythm, it will lead to friction. If you get dismissive about her ideas because you don't think they're good and because you are unwilling to put them within the context of where she's coming from, it will lead to friction. So, listening is crucial, but it's not just an exercise for your ears, it's also an exercise for your attention and your intention. But collaboration in marriage is also about curiosity. It's really hard for me to collaborate with people I'm not curious about. If I'm not curious about what you're bringing to the table, then I am assuming that I already know what your value is. I'm assuming that I already know how far you can go, how much you can endure, the sort of pressure you can take. I'm assuming that I know you, which is ridiculous because people are always changing. I can't love you the way you needed to be loved 3 years ago because you're a different person today. Life happened to you and you discovered some fragile areas in your life you never knew existed. So, what I used to do 3 years ago is outdated for who you've become today. And if I'm listening, I'll see that. Who are you now? That's what I mean by curiosity. You date people because you're curious about them. Who are you? You marry them because you're sure about them. I know who you are. I know who you are causes friction because if I know who you are, I don't have to date you. There's very little dating going on in marriages because you're no longer curious about her. You're saying that you're curious about him, but have you asked yourself if your curiosity is actually just suspicion? There's a difference. But if I'm going to be curious about you, you have to be interesting. This is why the individual parts matter. You can't stop growing and stretching as an individual because you're married. Just because you're married doesn't mean it's the end of growing and stretching. Yes, we're in this thing together, but you also have to be developing as an individual. So when I look in your direction, I have to ask myself, what's going on over there? I have to be thinking, I didn't even know she had that in her. I knew she was good at this, but I didn't think she could do it like that. And you have to be interested enough in him to be struck by similar thought. Wow, he really surprised me. I can't believe how quickly he bounced back. Where did he get that work ethic from? You know, it's amazing how easy it is to get someone to be curious about you when you make yourself interesting. So, the key to curiosity in marriages is growth. And although you want to see that growth directly reflected in your marriage, you have to understand that growth first happens on an individual basis. If you don't get that, then all you and your partner will be doing is trying in vain to take each other to the places where magic used to be. Remember how it was when we first met? Do you remember what life was like before the kids came? Or that time we spent 2 weeks in Australia backpacking? That's where magic used to be, in the interesting places of the past. But your marriage won't get interesting again unless you get interested in you again. Interested in your growth and in your development as an individual. After all, interesting people are interested people. Waiting. I said it was part of step 3. Step 3 is all about a management system. See, now you realize that you're in the trenches. Now you understand that it needs to be a vision. Now you know that collaboration is essential. So what you need is a system that manages both the vision and the way you and your partner collaborate. Why? Because good intentions aren't good enough. You have a worthy and meaningful destination for your marriage, but if there's no plan and no tools to get there, you're not gonna make it. You get stuck, and eventually those good intentions will turn toxic and it will lead to more damage because you keep visualizing a place you can't reach. So a management system is mandatory. When you get right down to it, a management system is about tools. It's about being able to keep the vision productive and progressing, even in the presence of the inevitable strains and stresses, the frustrations and disappointments that eventually pop up. This sort of work in marriage is hard, and it brings out the unexpected in people. All of a sudden, the strong macho man you thought you knew shows you the 7-year-old boy within. You hardly see it coming, and all of a sudden there it is. The confident and cheerful woman you married reveals the parts of herself that are riddled with anxiety and restrained by depression. It can be shocking, but you can't give up on the vision. You can't give up on the collaboration. You have to be willing and able to move forward toward that vision of a stronger marriage in spite of the shocks and the surprises that come. This is what it means to be naked and afraid. It means that you're going to see me at my most vulnerable. It means that there'll be some times when whatever issues I'm trying to work out will make you feel uncomfortable. But it also means that there'll be some times when you'll see the parts of me that need to be healed, that need to be held and loved. Without a management system, you won't be able to handle it. A good management system includes 3 essential tools. The first of these tools is called waiting. That's right. There's going to be some waiting. In fact, changes don't happen overnight, and a vision takes a while to materialize. I know we live in an instant society where everything is supposed to happen in a blink, but let me warn you, if you're looking for instant change, you're going to be disappointed. Even the little things take time to change because you can't always see the big things they're attached to. You think his self-doubt started happening after he lost the business? No, that's attached to a big thing he's been dealing with on some level since he was 11. You want her to back down and ease up, but that's attached to a big thing that happened to her when she was 17. She can't help it. She can't back down. To do so for her would be to be vulnerable, and for her to be vulnerable feels like dying. I'm warning you, it's going to take some time to reach that vision. Waiting does not mean idling. It doesn't mean just standing by and looking. I'm talking about proactive waiting. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, like the two thoughts, proactive and waiting, don't go together. But that's exactly what I mean. Your waiting has to be proactive and strategic. The fact that you're waiting means that your partner is stuck somewhere, and that's an invitation to be proactive about being an available support resource. Instead of getting frustrated because you have to wait, you can be proactive by positioning yourself to be a resource and not just an impatient spectator wondering how long it's going to take him to get it together, or if she's ever going to really deal with her past. It's important to wait because people need time. They need support and courage. Sometimes you're waiting for your partner because they haven't figured out how to tell you about the part of themselves that needs to be loved, a part of themselves they're ashamed of. It's not always easy to change who you've been. And for the person who is being waited on, don't make your partner wait longer than necessary. You have to be making moves that let them know that you're coming and that you're still on the path, that the vision you both have for your marriage is clear and it's still real. Don't just be serious about moving forward, be sincere and deliberate about it. Maybe your next move is to go see a therapist by yourself or to take some anger management classes. Whatever it is, throw your entire self into it. Don't keep your partner waiting longer than need be. Waiting it's a big deal. When people wait, it means that they haven't given up yet. It means that they're still watching, that something you have is still valuable. That's what children do. In fact, that's one of the ways children demonstrate to adults that they understand what love is. I mean, you tell your child that you pick her up at 4, but you're 45 minutes late, stuck in traffic. The child is waiting and waiting and waiting, and you're nowhere in sight. She gets frustrated and maybe even angry. She may be frustrated, she may be angry, but here's what's going on in that kid's mind. Dad is late, but I know he's coming. Mom is late, but I know she's coming. That's what love looks like to a child. You're coming. And that's the same for marriages. Sometimes you'll have to wait, but as long as you know it's coming, then there's still something there. So don't be afraid to wait. The second tool is called forgiveness. Forgiveness is a big one because it's hard. It's hard because you have to let go of something that has been feeding you. Anger, pain, and disappointment will nourish you if that's the person you want to be. If you need to hold on to your anger in order to justify being who you've become, then anger will feed you. If you have to hold on to the pain, then pain will offer itself to you. If disappointment is what you need to feel, then disappointment will be there in abundant supply. But if you're able to forgive and to let go, then you've opened yourself up to the possibility of a new you. And that's what forgiveness in marriage is all about. New possibilities. Forgiveness is a tool that you're going to have to bring out and use because you can't work toward a worthy vision without experiencing setbacks or running into the roadblocks and the unforeseen challenges that always come. You're going to have to forgive the small things as well as the big things, and the minor infractions and the major injuries. Forgiveness is significant. He agreed to change. He agreed he wouldn't run up to his mother's house every time you guys got into a fight. Not only was he late to change, and you had to wait for him, he's back at his mother's house complaining about you. Can you forgive him? She agreed to stop micromanaging you and the marriage, and she stopped for a while, but now she's back at it with even more scrutiny. Can you forgive her? Small things. Well, what about the big things? Someone just found out something. Someone just got caught cheating. Can you forgive her now? I know you need some time to process it, but ultimately the question is the same. Can you forgive him? I almost hesitate to go here because this part is sensitive and isn't something most people can really absorb in just a few minutes of my talking about it. It really ought to be an entire speech all by itself, but I want to say something about it because it's hard to talk about forgiveness in marriages and not talk about cheating. In the beginning, I said this speech is for grown people. People who are not just serious, but are sincere about getting their marriages back on track.
For more GoodTalk transformational albums like this, download the GoodTalk app to start your transformation today. Link in the description.
If you're playing games, then this isn't for you. Come back when you're matured a bit. If you're running around looking for encounters just for sport, then this isn't for you. Come back when you're ready. But for the sincere people, I want you to know this. Just because your partner cheated doesn't mean that they're necessarily playing games or that they no longer have a real interest in you. It comes down to two things: options and validation. Human beings need both, but men and women prioritize each differently. Most people think that when men cheat, they cheat because they have options, when the reality is that when men cheat, they cheat precisely because they have run out of options. And rather than facing that intimidating reality, they escape into a distraction. It's not about leaving their partners or that they no longer love their partners. I mean, some men cheat to stay married. I know it sounds absurd, but it's true. When a woman cheats, people say it's because she's unhappy. It's not just that she's unhappy, it's that she's tired. There are many unhappily married women right now listening to this who've never cheated. But when they get tired, all they need is an opportunity. She may be unhappy because her expectations have been disappointed. But when she is tired, it means that she's tired of waiting for validation. She's not going to wait for you anymore. She'll go out there and find it for herself. Men need options before validation, while women respond to validation before options. There's a lot to say here, but essentially it's this. When men get stuck in life, they're not looking for validation, they're looking for options. They need a way out. They don't need you to be their mother. They don't need you to tell them how smart or how strong or how wonderful they are. They don't need all that. They need some options. What am I going to do now with what I've got left? They need your help in exploring their options. What's over there? There's some skills you can use over there. Let's try this. What's that thing you wanted to do before? Let's look at this one again. Options. That's what's happening when he's stuck and heads out with the boys. They're looking at options. After options comes validation. because now you've helped him explore an option that he may need some support with. Now you may have to remind him just who he is. Again, I'm talking about sincere men here, the ones who cheat. I mean, what do you think the person they're cheating with is helping them explore? Options. That's who they're talking to about their options. For whatever reason, he can't talk to you, so he's talking to her. Oh, he's having sex with her. But you have to understand that men and women use sex differently. Yes, both men and women use sex to feel connected and to satisfy urges and for release and all that. But generally, when it comes to sex, what a good conversation is to a woman, sex is to a man. For a man, sex is the conversation. If you're a woman, think about it like this. How you feel when you have something to say. And you need to say it, and you have to talk about the details, and you have to include everything, and you don't want to be interrupted. You just want to say it. Then imagine not being able to say it. Imagine not being able to say what you have to say, that thing that's burning on your mind, thing you've been wanting to talk about all day since you left work. The conversation is your release, regardless of whether or not the person you're talking to actually really wants to have a conversation or to participate fully. If you understand sex the way you understood conversations, I wonder what would change in your marriage. Women need validation before options. And this isn't some way of trying to infantilize women. I'm not saying that a woman needs to be told that she's pretty, otherwise she's somehow incapable of earning a degree, starting a business, or raising a family, and dealing with the multitude of complexities that life throws at her. No, I'm not saying that at all. I am saying, however, that a woman needs to feel seen, heard, understood, appreciated, and wanted before she will fully consider the options you're trying to force her to listen to. Men seem to be wired differently. Those attributes seem to be something that's earned. I don't get to be listened to, heard, seen unless I have proved some level of success with my options. That's why for men, it's options first and then validation. It's the other way around for women. You know, it's funny that one of the things men eventually learn about women is something that we go around preaching like a gospel to other men. And that is that sometimes, as a man, you need to shut up. Keep quiet when your lady's talking because you're too busy listening for a solution. You're listening to solve a problem when you should be listening just to hear her. Don't listen because you're trying to fix something. Listen because you're trying to be present for her. You should see how men tell other men about that discovery. It's not always obvious to a lot of men that your partner isn't interested in your options when she feels unheard, unseen, and ill-understood by you. Validation before options. So instead of rushing in, trying to fix something while she's talking, try responding like this instead. Oh, really? Is that how it happened? That's how you really felt? You told me about that last week, didn't you? What about the other thing, the big thing that happened on Monday? Don't fix. Participate. Again, I'm talking about sincere women here, the ones who cheat. What do you think the person they're cheating with is helping them with? Validation. That person is helping her echo. That person is helping her strengthen her belief that she exists and that she's real. That person is her echo. What's an echo? It's feedback that proves you're here. Oh, there's so much more context and nuance I want to add to this, but I have to save it. But why did I take a detour into the risky business about men and women, about options and validation? I did so to help you see that sex is not just about sex, and that cheating is not just about disloyalty. There's a saying in French, "To comprendre, c'est tout pardonner." It means to understand all is to forgive all. I know we've been talking about sex and cheating, but we're still talking about forgiveness. It's very hard to do, but when you understand more about the person you're trying to forgive, it makes forgiveness after betrayal a bit more bearable. Forgiveness is one of those tools in your management system that the vision absolutely depends on. And it's a tool that both partners need to know is being used, or else it will become a blunt tool. Don't forgive in silence. And don't forgive alone. Say something. Let it be known. It's hard for me to forgive because you truly, truly hurt me. But I forgive you. I don't excuse you, but I forgive you. The third tool is called compassion. Compassion means I'm with you. Yes, I know we said some awful things to each other, but I'm with you. When you get like that, you absolutely drive me up the walls. You get me so frustrated, but I'm with you. I know I broke some dishes and slammed the door and stormed out the house, but I'm still with you. If I'm with you, I understand you. If I'm with you, I'm for you. If I'm with you, I'm coming back home. If I'm with you, it means that my greatest pleasure comes from giving you pleasure. This isn't about sex, I'm talking about joy. So I'm with you. But I can't be with you unless I'm open. I have to be able to receive you on your good days and on your bad days, on my bad days and on my good days. And I can't do that if I'm holding on to me too tightly. If I'm all balled up, I can't be with you because I'm flinching. When we were kids, my older brother would sneak up to me and punch my arm. It was amusing to him, but painful for me. He would do it all the time, so much so that eventually, when he would get close to me, I'd automatically brace myself for the punch. He thought it was hilarious, and he would ask me with a mischievous grin on his face, "Why are you flinching?" He knew why. You see, without even thinking about it, I had taught myself to flinch because I knew pain was coming. So, if you are sincere about a new vision for your marriage, about creating a deeper connection and greater strength in your marriage, then you have to unflinch. It's one thing to understand that the possibility of pain and disappointment is real, but it's an entirely different thing to perpetually be preparing for it. You expect pain, so you behave like a wounded wife. You expect disappointment, so you behave like a disappointed husband. You expect resentment, so you behave like a resented partner. All that acting will kill your marriage and destroy you in the process. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't flinch. That would be like saying don't feel pain when something heavy falls on your foot. What I'm saying is don't stay flinched. Marriages will not survive if they're dragging the corpse of all disappointment into the future. Nor will they thrive by feeding off old joys alone. Marriage is not a state of being, it's a state of action. And if there's no movement, it's dead. I'm not one of these people who believes that marriages are sacred things given to you by God and all that jazz. Talk to some old married people and they'll tell you the truth. Marriage is something you do, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. But if it's going to work, you've got to do the work, both the outer work and the inner work. The inner work is about you. The outer work is about the trenches. It's about the vision. It's about collaboration and a management system that keeps it all together and moving forward despite the necessary challenges and the inevitable setbacks that come up. James and Anne discovered that marriage is hard, but it can also be beautiful, rewarding, and absolutely worth every moment. To be married is to be naked and afraid in a wilderness you've never known. Oh, the things you can discover. And even though in the final analysis, all we're doing is just searching for ourselves, we can't search alone. My name is Angelo, and I'm the Motivator.
The Last Boy King, exclusively on the GoodTalk app.
I'm one of your biggest fans, kid, and yet if I'm being honest, sometimes I worry. I worry about the man you might become. I suppose, though, my worry is not unique, as it must be the worry of all fathers who dedicate their time to watching their young sons grow, pushing them forward and caringly challenging their boundaries of ability, all the while keeping tucked away in the corner of his heart that unspoken wish that every sincere father holds that wish for his own son, that one day you will be better than me.